Boldwood presents Dead Reckoning, written by Rob Sinclair and read by David Thorpe. Prologue. The smell of charred wood and cordite and ferrous blood filled his nose. He inhaled deeply, his heart pounding against his ribs. The beats came so fast now, as though time itself had sped up, careening him and so many others toward an inevitable and destructive outcome. "Tell me!" he screamed, so hard that the last word sounded choked, and he was sure he tasted his own blood at the back of his throat, the lining scratched raw from the force of the demand. His finger twitched on the trigger, but the small gesture of pulling, firing, would come with not-so-small repercussions. A line crossed. Mental turmoil. Again. "Tell me, or you know what happens." But the man in front of him, crumpled on the floor in his dirty and torn clothes, blood streaming through his wavy long black hair, said nothing. "Come on, do it," came the voice in Peake's ear. "We don't have time. Do it now." "Tell me, or she's dead," Peake said to the man on the floor, not sounding as angry or even as urgent now, more pleading. "Just tell me." "You have no choice. You have to do it." He pushed the barrel of the gun more firmly against the woman's skull. "Please!" screeched the bleeding man. But it was too little, too late. Peake pulled the trigger. Chapter 1. A feisty wind blasted down Essex Street straight into Simon Peake's face as he strode along looking for the bar. On a warm November day, relatively speaking, he had left his apartment on the Upper West Side with only a thin jacket in bright sunshine. This far down Manhattan, he felt as though he had entered another climate altogether, and he shivered as he walked. He'd not been to these streets before, hadn't been to the bar O'Hare's, an Irish joint, like pretty much every other bar in New York City. Except this one really did belong to an Irish family. People who'd actually been born on the Emerald Isle, rather than those who had a great-great-grandparent who had a distant relative who may or may not have been to Limerick once. He spotted the paint-peeling sign for the bar over the other side of the road and made a beeline for the entrance. He opened the door and stepped inside and saw everything he expected. Clovers, Irish tricolours, dark wood fittings, Guinness on tap. A bearded and tattooed barman. A few drinkers dotted about, but the place was far from teeming on a Wednesday night. He settled on a stool at the bar. "Can I help you?" the barman said in a gruff voice, Irish accent, that matched his appearance. One of the family? No. Peake ordered a beer and a whiskey chaser. He left cash on the bar and downed the whiskey before looking around the room. He'd never spoken to Sean Lafferty before, but he'd recognised him from the pictures he'd seen online. No sign of him. "You looking for someone?" the barman asked, one eyebrow raised as he wiped clean a glass that looked pretty damn dry already. "Sean. Is he coming tonight?" "Sean? Sean who?" The guy glared, and Peake found himself caught in two minds. Then the barman laughed, overly heartily, and a couple of other patrons looked over. "Not seen him tonight. Or any of the boys." And with that, the guy moved off to serve someone else. Peake worked through his beer and ordered another, then another, then another, as he waited, watching with keen interest anyone who came in from the street. "You drinking alone?" the woman who'd walked up to the spot next to him asked. He'd seen her come over, watched her in the mirror behind the bottles of spirits. Tight jeans, heels, a thin sweatshirt that showed off her figure, curly, dark brown hair, a dusting of freckles on her nose. She'd come into the bar alone half an hour before, had sat alone with a glass of wine as she played on her phone. Yeah, Peake said, turning to the woman with a half smile before looking around the room. You? Needed to relax. Let me guess. Date, but she didn't show. No, not a date. Work. She glanced at the bar top where his empty shot glass sat next to the half-finished beer in his hand. At least the barman had cleared away his several empties. Long day, huh? She said. Something like that. So, do you want company? He looked across the space again, checked his watch. Gone 10 p.m. now. Sean should have been here at 8. Peake had sat on his own, drinking on his own, for more than 2 hours. If the guy walked through the doors now, he'd probably be too drunk anyway. Peake would come back another night to find him. Why not? He said. She beamed him a smile before brushing the loose hair from her face with a deft swish. She sat down on the stool next to him, and the barman spotted her waiting and came over to her. He knew her. Peake could tell by the relaxed, eager-to-please look in his eyes. What are you drinking? The woman asked Peake. Same again, Peake said to the barman before downing what was left of the beer in front of him. She asked for a beer too, but no chaser, and the barman got to work. I'll get these, Peake said when she reached for her purse. She gave him a cheeky smile, but said nothing as she relented. A common trick of hers? I'm Katie, she said, holding out her hand. Simon. I've not seen you in here before, she said, holding his eye as she took a sip from her drink. Peake downed his whiskey, then sank a third of his beer. No, he said. You new to the area? Kind of. Kind of? I don't live on the Lower East. I do. She said that with a certain directness. Not far from here, actually. So, you're a regular then? He asked. Regular enough. It's not like I'm an alcoholic. She laughed awkwardly at that. No, but you do come to the bar on a Wednesday night on your own to drink. Long day, right? Right. They both chuckled at that, though he didn't really know why. The opening door caught his attention, and Peake turned his head to look at the 3 young men walking in. Confident. Arrogant. One hit another on the shoulder. Camaraderie or machismo or bonding or something. And the 2 of them guffawed like juveniles, but the guy at the front had a sterner look as he eyeballed the other customers. Was that? No, not Sean. You know them? Katie asked. No, Peake said, turning back to the bar a little disappointed. He downed the rest of his beer. You want another? Sure. Another chaser down the hatch, and Peake's head started to spin. He didn't really care. He stood up, grabbing for his pocket, and somehow made a hash of it. He knocked the stool over and then stumbled as he picked it back up. He pulled out his cigarettes and a lighter. Not in here, buddy, the barman said with a glower. I know that, Peake said. He turned to Katie. You want one? I don't smoke. I'll be back in 5. I'll keep you company. Al, watch your things. The barman nodded and Katie followed Peake to the street. She took her beer with her. Peake hadn't bothered. He lit up and took a long drag as he rested his head against the outside wall. I can't remember the last time I met anyone who smokes, she said, with a curious look on her face. He didn't say anything as he sucked in again, the deep inhale clearing some of the alcohol fog away. But why do you? She asked. He looked down at her. Smoke? He shrugged. Habit? You always have? For long enough. You know it'll kill you. Maybe that's the idea. She held his eye, and he could tell by the confusion on her face that she didn't know how to take the comment. So, you don't care if you die? He didn't say anything. There are better ways to kill yourself, she said. Are we really talking about suicide? She smiled, though the look carried a strangely sinister edge. Not first date material? She asked. So this is a date now? Why not? She said, putting her hand onto his and gently stroking his fingers. So how would you do it? He asked. What? Kill yourself. The smile faded, but he didn't sense any offence or disgust or discomfort, only deep thought. Something quick. Maybe jump in front of a train? What about the driver? The poor people who have to clean up the mess? Bullet to the brain, then? She suggested. You have a gun? Do you? Anyway, again, it's messy. Pills and alcohol? Peake paused. Too absolute. Absolute? He couldn't explain it. Was this even a serious conversation? Had he considered suicide? Yes. Multiple times. Perhaps he simply didn't have the guts to do it. Or perhaps he was holding out for something. No. More that suicide felt like cheating. The easy way out. Smoking? Maybe the cigarettes will kill me, he said, but I don't know when. It's not in my control. I'm happy to leave my fate to fate. If I die, when I die, it'll be because I deserve it. She didn't say anything to that, just stared at him with intrigue, like a therapist would with an eccentric patient. He couldn't believe she hadn't run a mile away from him already. It'd be a waste, she said. What? You? Killing yourself? It'd be a waste. You're... What? Interesting. He waited for more. None came. That's it? He said. That's it. Christ. I might as well have another smoke now. Other than the group of 3 men who'd remained in the booth in the far corner at closing time, Peake and Katie were the final customers to leave. By that point, Peake had had several too many, and Katie held onto his arm as they stepped out into the blustery and chilly night. And Peake wasn't sure if it was her helping to keep him walking steady or the other way around. Can you walk me home? Katie asked, craning her neck to peer up at him, hunger in her eyes. You live nearby? She'd said so earlier, hadn't she? Peake couldn't really remember with the alcohol swimming in his brain. Not far enough for the subway, not close enough that I feel safe to walk alone. He looked along the street. Quiet. Wednesday night. Like many parts of Manhattan, the area was a mix of clashing cultures and demographics. O'Hare's bar sat on a wide avenue with endless rows of cafes, restaurants, bars, independent shops, all now closed up for the night. Within a street or two, there were traditional brownstones, rented by young professionals and families, but also more modern high-rise condos slowly squeezing out the older projects, one gentrified building at a time. But take a wrong turn and... Yeah, I'll walk you. They set off, arm in arm. Not far at all. Not even half a mile until they stopped by the stoop to a brownstone on a tree-lined street that had cars crammed either side of cracked tarmac. This is me, she said, unlinking her arm and standing in front of him. He looked beyond her to the building. A nice-looking place, really. Certainly expensive-looking. You want to have a coffee? Pete couldn't help himself. He burst out laughing, and after a moment, with a doubtful look on her face, Katie did too. "Sorry," she said. "It's not... I don't normally..." "Then why me?" Peake said. "Why not?" He checked his watch again. Gone midnight. A waste of a night, in one sense. In another... "You have coffee?" he asked. "Actually, no," she said, "but I have vodka." "Then let's go," he said with a smile. Chapter 2. Katie did have a bottle of vodka. Grey Goose, to be precise. Relatively expensive, though, in truth, Peake wasn't sure he could tell the difference between that and cheaper brands. Not that they drank much before they ended up in the king-sized bed, in a room that, much like the rest of her apartment, was spacious and tastefully decorated. They didn't sleep much. Peake awoke from a semi-slumber as the early morning rays poked through the gap between the hastily closed curtains. Katie had nestled up to him at some point in the night, her hand on his chest. He watched her for a few moments. She looked so peaceful, content. His eyes rested on her hand. He shuffled up a bit in the bed, slowly reached out and took her wrist gently in his fingers and turned her arm over. He huffed quietly. He'd not noticed before. The scars. He'd been too focused on other parts of her. But her wrist was heavily marked. Several lines of raised, lumpy flesh, not recent. He sighed and held her a little more closely. They'd not talked much about her last night. He wanted to know more, but... He carefully slipped from underneath her and rolled away and grabbed his boxers from the floor before he stepped quietly to the ensuite. He gazed at himself in the mirror for a moment before he went to the toilet. As he washed his hands, he stared at his reflection again, focusing on his eyes, a challenge of some sort. Why did he look so... disappointed? "Proud of yourself?" he asked. He got no answer. He moved back out into the bedroom. Katie was awake, the covers pulled up to her neck. "Do you always talk to yourself in the bathroom?" she asked, with a cheeky look on her face. "Not always." He sat down on the edge of the bed. He'd expected a hangover, but he felt fine. Actually, despite the sullen look on his face, he felt more than fine. Especially with the thoughts and the smells and the taste of last night still so fresh. He reached for his jeans and took out his cigarettes and a lighter. "Do it in here if you want," Katie said, as Peake stood, intending on moving to the balcony. "You don't mind? In your bedroom?" She shrugged. "Normally. I don't know, it seems... very you." What did that mean? Sitting back on the bed, he lit up and took a long inhale, which sent a hit of calmness up into his head. She didn't say anything, just watched him with fascination until Peake finished the smoke and grabbed his jeans and his shirt. "I'd like to see you again," Katie said, before throwing her hand to her forehead and pushing her head down onto the pillow. God, that sounded so desperate. Peake smiled at her, said nothing. "You know, I don't normally bring men back here after I just met them. I don't normally..." "Why did you?" "What?" "Why did you ask me back?" He held her eye. He couldn't read the look. "Sometimes it just feels... right. Right?" He leaned over and kissed her forehead. "So?" she said when he straightened up. He didn't say anything. She sighed. "Simon Peake. Is that even your real name?" "Yes." "A man of few words. What if I Googled you? Would I find out more about you then?" Did that mean she was going to? If you looked hard enough. She frowned. Now I'm really not sure that I want to. Don't worry, I'm not a serial killer. Well, that's a relief at least. He walked around to the door and paused a moment to look back to her. He wanted to stay. See you, Katie. Goodbye, Simon Peake. She slumped and sighed, and he turned and walked away. He didn't take the direct route for the subway and home. Instead, he retraced his steps from the previous night, moving back toward O'Hare's. Closed, of course, but he stopped at the windows and put his face to the glass to look into the dark space beyond. No sign of anyone at all. Empty glasses remained on the table in the corner where the three men had stayed for the lock-in. What time had they left? Where had they gone? Peake turned around and looked along the street. Movement caught his attention, up in the top windows of the building opposite. He stared, but couldn't figure out what he'd seen. A flapping curtain? A bird flying by? Someone at the window? No one in sight now. He set off for home. He'd be back to the Lower East Side soon enough, and not just on the off chance that he'd see Katie again. The subway was quick and incident-free, and Peake walked out of the station at 86th and along to West End Ave to his apartment building. A big building with over 100 homes, though they were far from the most luxurious in the area. No concierge here, just one example of the relative quality and expense of the dwellings beyond the lofty but plain atrium. Peake took the stairs, listening to the familiar sounds from the apartments beyond. TVs, music, shouting, English but other languages too. Babies crying, kids screeching. In happiness? He reached the 6th floor, then paused a beat when he saw his neighbour's door, directly adjacent to his, was open. Yelena stood beyond the threshold wearing a silk robe, her arms folded in defiance. Her hair was tied back, her makeup touched up even early in the morning, but not so much that it hid her swollen right eye. The man standing in front of her, black shoes, jeans, big black overcoat, turned as Peake approached. "Can I help you?" the young guy said with an angry snarl. "No," Peake said, looking away from him and to Yelena. "You okay?" She nodded, but he sensed she was withholding a whole host of brewing emotions. "Mister, you need to mind your own goddamn business," the man said. Peake said nothing as he opened his door and stepped inside. He closed the door and stood and thought a moment, then peered through the peephole. The man remained outside, not shouting, but definitely pissed off as he talked to Yelena, who Peake now couldn't see. The guy shook his head, then stepped away. But as he reached the stairs, he turned again and glared first at Yelena's door, then at Peake's. He paused there before he started down. Peake opened the door and moved over to Yelena's. He knocked lightly. She opened up a few inches. "It's okay, Simon." "You don't look okay." "I'm fine. You have a good night?" "Better than you, I think." She shook her head. The look of sadness in her eyes pulled at his heart. "You shouldn't, please. Don't say it. Don't say anything. What am I supposed to do?" Peake had no answer to that. The number of times he'd seen her with marks, bruises, guys who hit her, choked her. She took it all. How long before one of them took it too far? No, they already had. Too many times. They thought paying her meant she owed them. Anything they wanted. No boundaries. "You want some company?" he asked. "Not really." They stood there in silence for a few moments. Peake felt so useless. "You have a good one." Yelena said before she pushed the door closed. Peake moved back to the stairs and stared down. No sign of that scumbag now. Peake had seen him before, like he had many of her clients. He made a mental note of their faces, particularly the ones who left her with cuts and bruises. Maybe he'd accidentally run into that guy at some point. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he answered the call as he walked back inside. Jay?
Peake, you fucking idiot! You didn't meet him?
I was there, he didn't show.
What? Sean called me this morning. Said you were at the bar all night, getting pretty cozy with a brunette.
What? Sean wasn't there. Or had Peake made a mistake? Too drunk or too into Katie that he hadn't paid proper attention?
He saw you, and he saw you leave with Katie, too.
Katie? He knows her.
Yeah, you fucking moron. Have you any idea who she is?
No, he didn't.
Katie Springer.
Springer?
Her mother's name. But she's Harry's niece. Are you insane?
I swear I didn't know.
Maybe not, but...
A knock on the door. A meaty thud, more like. Peake pulled the phone from his ear, could still hear his friend blathering as he looked through the spy hole. Not the guy who'd left the bruise on Yelena's face, even if Peake had really wanted it to be. Instead, 3 men, 3 angry faces that he recognized from O'Hare's. I've got to go, he said, before ending the call. He thought for a moment, then opened the door. Chapter 3.
You Peake?
The guy standing at the front of the 3 asked, the shortest, youngest, but edgiest looking of them. Yeah. Then the 3 peeled aside, and a 4th man stepped up onto the 6th floor. An older man, 60s, thinning grey hair, a lined face, a slightly overweight figure, but not so much that Peake would expect him to be so out of breath and red-cheeked from the hike up the stairs.
This him?
The old man said, after dabbing his brow with a hanky.
This is him,
his younger minion answered.
Do you know who I am?
Harry Lafferty, Peake said.
Good. That saves explaining, then. Let's go inside.
Peake didn't move for a moment, not until young man stepped right up into his face. Well, more into his chest, really, as Peake stood a good 5 inches taller.
Come on in,
Peake said, finally stepping aside. Harry Lafferty. Not so much a kingpin, not really, just a guy who knew how to make money, cash, the old-fashioned way, some would say. As for the other men, the snarly younger one with the chains around his neck was Joey. The tallest and brutish of them, with a clean-shaven head and a fighter's face, squashed nose, turned-out ear, was Dolan. Boxer? MMA, perhaps, Peake thought. Or maybe he just found entertainment, or money, in brawling. The last man was called Chops, a nickname Peake assumed. Chops was the one who Peake found the most curious, in looks at least. At 6'2", he matched Peake in height, but had a rake-thin frame, wore sensible clothes, and had a sensible hairstyle, and wore thin-rimmed round glasses that were perched on the end of his nose as he reached up on tiptoes to run his hand along the top of the kitchen cabinets. Looking for what?
Don't worry about him,
Harry said, or more like croaked. His voice was dry and cracked. Peake turned back to face the boss man, sitting on a chair across the small round dining table from him. Dolan stood behind the old man, glaring. Joey had propped himself on the back of the sofa, twisting a knife in his hands, spinning the tip around his palm.
You came to my bar last night,
Harry said. Yeah.
You were looking for my son.
I was.
Why?
Work.
Work?
Jay said Sean could help me find work.
You know my son?
No.
You know me?
No.
So why would he give you work?
Peake stared at Harry. What kind of a question was that? Chops opened up the end kitchen cabinet and started rooting through. Peake glanced over again.
Hey, dickhead!
Dolan shouted, smacking his foot onto the wooden floor for further effect.
Pay attention when Harry's talking to you. Tell me about yourself,
Harry said. Not much to tell. Harry sighed and sat back in his chair and messed with his shirt collar a little, as if trying to release pressure.
Pretend this is your job interview.
I just need work. Cash. So I can pay my rent. So I can live. Chops had finished searching, for now. He flicked through the mail on the worktop, then frowned before he took out his phone and stared at the screen.
How do you know Jay?
Harry asked. Was there any point in lying? We met inside. A slight pinch to Harry's eyes.
So, that's it. You're an ex-con.
Have you any idea how hard it is for guys like me to get decent work in this city?
There are programs.
Been there, done that. Here I am, unemployed and broke, and wondering what's the point of anything.
Plenty of janitorial jobs, Dolan said. You too good to clean shit, pretty boy?
Pretty boy? Peake knew his relatively soft features had often been mistaken for a soft personality, but most people would look pretty put next to that guy's gnarled face.
How long did you do?
Harry asked. Peake sucked in a lungful of air before he answered, reliving the lost time in that moment. 5 years. Harry whistled.
Prison change you?
Not really.
That's a long stretch.
Life's long. Joey frowned.
You mean life as in being alive is long? Or a life sentence is long?
What? Peake said, confused.
Joey, shut up,
Harry said.
I thought I recognized your name.
Chop said, tapping his phone screen before he turned it for everyone else to see, even though the screen was too far away.
Simon Peake, 8 years for felony assault. What'd you do? Beat up your woman?
Dolan asked. No, Peake answered.
No,
Chop said, putting his phone away again.
He beat up 2 boys. Riverside Park.
Harry's face contorted into a snarl. Dolan shook his head as if in disappointment.
You like messing with kids? Dolan asked. Fuck this. I'm not working with a pedo.
Those boys were 16 and 17. Peake said, not that that was an explanation for anything. One had a gun, one had a knife, and I caught them raping a 15-year-old girl.
And I'm sure she was very thankful,
Chop said, but the police, the judge, and the jury didn't think it necessary for you to break the arm and femur of the younger kid or to stomp on the head of the other one, leaving him with a broken eye socket, a detached retina, and a jaw shattered into so many pieces that he'll never speak or eat properly again. Peake said nothing.
Is that true?
Harry asked. What? The injuries? I don't know. I haven't checked up on those 2 recently.
Funny guy, Dolan said. I meant, is it true they were raping a girl?
Harry said. Yes.
So he's a moral crusader, Dolan said. A vigilante. Is that what you are?
Harry asked. Chops had moved back to searching the kitchen. Only 2 more doors along until he reached it. I saved her, Peake said.
You nearly killed 2 kids,
Harry said.
permanently disfigured one of them.
Peake shrugged. Maybe I overreacted. Silence. And then Harry laughed, and Chops and Joey did too, and Dolan looked at his boss like he didn't know what was going on.
I like that,
Harry said.
Dry, but funny.
Peake hadn't intended to be funny.
So, now you're an ex-con in Manhattan, struggling for work.
Something like that.
And your friend, Jay, a distant relation of mine, told you to ask my son.
Yes.
Except Jay is a fucking disease. A drug addict who wades into deeper shit with every step he takes in life.
Peake said nothing, but apparently Dolan found that description amusing, judging by the smirk on his face. And it was pretty much true. Jay wasn't a bad guy, but he was a down and out. Inside, he and Peake had become close, had looked out for each other. But in the real world, Jay just didn't really fit. Perhaps Peake didn't either.
I've known his old man since I was a kid myself,
Harry said.
But I would never give work to that moron. Neither would my son.
I'm not Jay, Peake said.
No, you're just a loser who beats up kids,
Dolan said. Chops went to open the cupboard door. Peake leaped up from his chair. Chops spun around while Dolan unfolded his arms at the ready, and Joey jumped from the sofa, knife in hand. You don't need to be searching my things, Peake said to Chops. Why not? Peake didn't answer.
He asked you a question,
Harry said, the only man still sitting down. You want me to go to your house and start rifling through your shit? Peake asked.
No,
Harry said.
But I'm not you, and you're not me, and you're the one who wants work. From my family, aren't you?
Chops turned and opened the cupboard. He pulled out the Glock first, looked impressed as he clanked it down on the worktop, then he went for the little red cash box. Where's the key? Chops asked. Peake didn't answer.
Tell him,
Dolan said.
Top drawer.
Chops took the key and unlocked the box and fingered the contents before whistling.
Cash?
Dolan asked. No, Chops said, tilting the box slightly to show the 4 passports.
All yours?
Harry asked Peake. Yes.
Legit?
Some.
Who the fuck are you?
Dolan asked. I'm no one. Chops took the passports in turn. Simon Peake, British. Simon Peake, American. Andrew Chester, Canadian. Ahmed Ali, Saudi Arabian.
Ahmed Ali?
Dolan said.
You taking the piss?
Doesn't much look like an Ahmed to me, Joey said. Amazing what a beard can do, Chops added, showing everyone the picture.
So?
Harry prompted. What?
Are you going to explain? I reckon he's pulling some undercover shit,
Dolan said.
FBI or something. Is that true?
No. Silence. No one looked convinced. If I was, I haven't done a very good job of covering it, have I? Still, no one said anything. And why would the FBI be looking into you? Peake said to Harry.
FBI, DEA, whatever. I don't trust him.
Dolan spat on the floor. Do you mind? Peake said. Dolan glared, but didn't rise to the challenge.
You can see how this raises a lot of questions,
Harry said. Yeah, Peake said, but where those came from, what I did in my past, is irrelevant here. Do what you want. Search my history to your heart's content. Or you could just explain here and now, Chop said.
He's got a point,
Harry added. I was born in England, Peake said.
Yeah, I kind of figured that from the screwy accent.
Which Peake knew was off to most people, really. In America, everyone figured he was English, or even Australian, but in England, people thought he sounded American. The truth was, his accent didn't really belong to any one place, just like him. My mother's English, father's American.
So that explains 2 of the passports,
Harry said. I was in the British Army and...
And what? They give out fake passports to all their soldiers now?
No,
So?
they were necessary.
Shit! SAS?
Joey asked, looking almost impressed by the prospect. No, Peake said, not even close. And what you're looking at there is all that's left of that life. I shouldn't even still have those. Call them a souvenir or whatever. You went from the British Army to prison in New York for felony assault. Bit of a fall. Dishonorable discharge, I reckon, Chop said.
That right?
Harry asked. Yes, actually, Peake said, trying not to show any emotion. What did you do? Beat up some kids? Joey asked, before smirking at his own weak joke. No, Peake said. You don't need to know about any of that. Believe me, I'd rather forget it too. I left the army a long time ago. I was messed up. I came here for a new life. Then I spent 5 years of that new life behind bars because I snapped one time. But those 5 years, I have come to terms with what I am. Now I just want to get on. Harry nodded as if he understood. Then he got to his feet.
I don't like guns,
He said.
and in this city, it's not worth the risk, especially for an ex-con. Get rid of it.
Peake didn't respond. Was he supposed to?
If you're needed, we'll let you know,
Harry said. The 4 of them made their way to the door. Dolan stepped out first, followed by Harry, then Chops, and finally Joey, who still had the knife in his hands. He held Peake's eye as he walked past, as though egging Peake on to make a move. He didn't.
Oh, and as for my niece, Katie,
Harry said, turning around.
You're not the first guy, and you won't be the last, but you won't be going there again, you understand me?
Peake nodded. Joey slapped his shoulder. Answer the fucking question! I understand.
Good,
Harry said.
because she's messed up enough as it is. She doesn't need a miserable bastard like you around her. 5 minutes talking to you and even I want to kill myself.
Harry turned and moved for the stairs. This time, it was Chops who held back. Why? The look on his face. See you around, he finally said, before heading off after the others. Peake waited by the door a moment, listening to them descending, listening to their hushed conversation. What were they saying about him? But then the conversation became less muted. A brief exchange. With whom? Peake walked to the head of the stairs and spotted the casually dressed man heading up, 40s with wiry hair and a thick moustache, like he wanted it to be the 80s still. Peake knew him only as Wyatt, his surname, And he only knew that because he'd seen the name badge when he bumped into the guy in a convenience store while Wyatt was on duty. NYPD. He never wore his uniform when he came over to screw Yelena.
Friends of yours?
Wyatt asked as he reached the 6th floor. Did Wyatt know the Laffertys? Did they pay off the cops? It wouldn't surprise Peake in the slightest if they did, and if Wyatt was a cop on the take. No, Peake said, standing his ground. Wyatt looked unsure of himself, like he didn't know what Peake was doing standing there glaring at him. In the end, he shuffled away to Yelena's door, looking over his shoulder a couple of times. Peake stayed there, watching, not caring about imposing. Yelena opened up, robe gone. She was dressed up now, a tight and very short dress. Have fun, Peake said to Wyatt. Yelena sent him a not very friendly look. Wyatt, sheepish now, pushed past her into the apartment. Be nice to her. She sent a silent please Peake's way before she shut the door. Chapter 4. 8 years ago. The Middle East, Operation Zeus, Day 1. He thought he was prepared for the heat. He'd been to the region plenty of times, including in the height of summer. Yet, as he stepped off the plane onto the blistering tarmac of the runway and inhaled the superheated dry air, it caused a stabbing in his nostrils and made his lungs ache. He was already looking forward to getting to wherever he was going, so he could strip off his thick fatigues and take a long, cold shower. Peake, said the man who strode toward him from the waiting car. He wore casual clothes, jeans, t-shirt, topped off with a pair of aviators, though his thick-set physique, gruff voice, and generally stiff and confident manner suggested military. Well, that, and the fact that he was there at a military base to greet Peake as he stepped off a military plane. Yeah. He looked at his watch. You're late. Was he actually suggesting Peake was at fault for the plane having left the base in England 2 hours behind schedule? Sorry, he said regardless. You look like a simple army rat, the guy said, lifting his sunglasses and running his eyes up and down Peake. I was expecting James Bond. Peake didn't say anything to that. You got a change of clothes in there? He asked, indicating Peake's bulging backpack. A few. Civvies? Yeah. Put them on. Leave everything else here. You won't need it. The guy remained staring, and Peake stared right back, until the guy broke eye contact to look at his watch again. Peake, please don't waste any more of my time. You want me to get dressed out here? No. I want you to do the fucking Macarena. You do? Sunglasses fully off now, his face twisted in distaste. Are you for real? Peake rolled his eyes and got to it, changing clothes. He'd saved the Macarena. Get in the car, the man said when Peake was ready. Everyone's waiting for you. Peake wasn't introduced to the driver, but 2 minutes later they'd left Peake's belongings and the military base behind, riding in the dirty brown Jeep, which jostled and bounced along dusty roads, kicking up clouds of sand behind it. The grumpy idiot who'd met him off the plane told Peake to call him Chief, which gave little away about his real role or rank, other than to confirm he was in charge. They drove for a couple of hours into the centre of the capital. The civil war here had ended some 6 months previously, roadblocks removed, the rebuild underway as people tried to resume their normal lives. But evidence of the conflict remained, with entire streets where buildings were nothing but piles of rubble. Others where the buildings were burned out shells. Bullet holes riddled some of the structures, which were fortunate enough to remain standing. You know much about what happened here? Chief asked as the driver wound the car along narrow, twisting alleys. A little. Chief turned in his seat to send a glare Peake's way.
My best advice: forget whatever you thought you knew.
The driver eventually pulled up outside a sandy stone building 5 stories tall. Half the windows were boarded over, a quarter had cracked panes, leaving only a few that looked intact, even if the wood frames were obviously rotten.
Welcome to your new home,
Chief said to Peake before he opened his door. Then he turned back to the driver.
Keep moving, I'll let you know when I'm ready.
Peake stepped out, and a moment later the jeep disappeared down the street.
Come on,
Chief said. Peake followed him to the thick-looking wooden door. Not a new fixture, although the 2 locks looked new and secure enough. Chief opened up, and Peake headed into the much cooler interior after him. Cool, but musty.
No frills here, Chief said. This place does what it needs to do. If it's ever compromised, we move out and move on. Simple as that.
Got it, Peake said. They ended up on the 3rd floor, only 2 doors off the corridor. They went left, toward the one at the street side. Peake didn't ask what lay beyond the other door, but got the impression the building, once apartments, was otherwise unoccupied. He heard chatter as they approached the door, chatter which stopped when Chief knocked. Footsteps, then the clicking of locks releasing before the door opened to show a young man. Casual attire, thick, dark hair covered his head, and his face held a nicely trimmed beard that didn't leave much of his dark complexion uncovered. Chief, he said, before locking eyes with Peake. The final piece of the puzzle. Neither Chief nor Peake said anything to that. They moved inside into the basic but spacious apartment. 4 bedrooms. An open-plan area where 4 other people sat around a table. 3 men, 1 woman. Several glasses sat on top of the wood, and even though Peake couldn't see it, he could smell alcohol.
Bonding,
Chief said.
Something like that,
said one of the men, who sat back in his chair, an arrogant look in his piercing green eyes. Chief stood, arms folded, glaring, until the woman bent down and plucked a nearly empty bottle of vodka from behind her. Sneaked it in my bag, she said, just in case I couldn't find any here. Want some? She asked Chief, with a cheeky smile on her face. She looked a little more sheepish as Chief walked up to her and took the bottle and stared at it for a couple of seconds before unscrewing the cap and taking a big glug.
Enjoy it while you can, folks,
he said, wiping his chin and slamming the bottle down on the table.
That's the last one you're going to get for a long time, unless you distill it yourselves.
A few grumbles here and there.
Vodka aside, did they behave themselves?
Chief asked, as he looked to the man seated to the right of the woman, who appeared to be the oldest of the group, with specks of grey in his stubble. Early 40s, perhaps? He got to his feet. All eyes turned to him. Yeah, Chief. They all followed the rules. Thank you, Aries. A few raised eyebrows at that exchange, which Peake took to mean that the others in the group hadn't realised the older guy, Aries, weird name, was keeping an eye on them for the boss. You're a fucking stooge, Green Eyes asked Aries, sounding disgusted. Aries shrugged.
What?
Chief said.
You thought I could trust this rebel having known you all for 5 minutes?
No one responded to that.
Everyone take a seat, Chief said. It's time to get this op underway.
Chapter 5. Operations Use, Day 1.
Any questions before I start?
Chief asked, looking over at Peake and the others. Yeah, the woman said. What the fuck are we doing here, and who are these losers? Green Eyes blew her a kiss. A couple others grumbled under their breath.
For the benefit of our newcomer, Chief said. Let's not forget ground rule 1 here.
And that is? Peake asked.
It doesn't matter who you all are, where you came from, who sent you here. What matters is that you are here. And while you're here, you never discuss your real identities, even in this group. No talk of your unit or your employer or where you're from, your childhood, or any crap like that. Get it?
A series of nods and murmurs.
Second, I give the orders here. You don't need to know where up the chain those orders come from. Maybe I make them up myself. Maybe they're signed off from God himself. You don't second guess. You do what you're told.
He paused, expecting a response. He didn't get one.
As you probably figured now, Ares is my man on the ground here. Most of the time, I'll relay intel, activities, through him. So when he speaks, he's speaking for me. Got it? Yes, Chief,
came the replies, though Peake sensed not everyone was happy about that idea.
3, I don't know how long we'll be here. Weeks, months, years. But you're here 100%. None of you are to have any contacts back home. No phone calls, emails, video calls, electronics. Ares will tell you what you can use and when, but it's never for personal business. You will be compensated for your time here, but that's really the last thing that should be on your minds right now.
Again, no particular response when he paused this time, though a couple of the faces had turned more sour.
4, if this op doesn't go as planned, I'll do what I can to get you out. But understand this. We have no jurisdiction here, even if our troops are in that base down the road. Unofficially, the British government helped to support the rebels in the war. Those rebels now run this country, but their victory wasn't without a shitload of bloodshed, and even more bad blood generated between the opposing sides to this endless fucking tit-for-tat sectarian fuckabout. Even if we have a few troops hanging around out of sight, our government has now officially distanced itself from the new boys in charge, at least while the idea of war crimes is still fresh in the international press. My point is, I know this place. I've been here for years. Forget about good and bad, and don't even get started on ideology. Today's good guys are tomorrow's genocidal maniacs. We don't have friends. We don't have allies. Concentrate only on this op. You're here for a reason. That's all you need to know.
And that reason is? Green Eyes asked.
I'll get to that. But first, back to the basics. Ares.
All eyes turned to him. Even before he started up, it hadn't escaped Peake's attention that most likely Ares was a code name, particularly given the name of the operation. Zeus, the chief deity of the ancient Greeks. Ares, the god of war. Apt.
Only ever refer to yourselves and each other by the names I'm about to read out,
Ares said. He looked at the woman, Hera. She shrugged, looked like she couldn't care less. She's the queen of the gods, Green Eyes said, looking impressed, as though she'd just gone up in his estimation. Talos, Ares said to Green Eyes. Who the fuck is Talos? He asked.
If you must know, he's a giant forged from bronze, Ares said, given by Zeus to his lover as her personal protector.
Talos nodded now, apparently happy with that. He lifted his arms up to show his huge biceps.
I mean, I think I should have been a god, but that'll do.
Hera smiled at him. Peake thought he understood the look.
Minos,
Ares said to the bearded guy who had earlier opened the door. He simply nodded. Did he know the name? From what Peake could remember of Greek mythology, Minos was one of Zeus's sons, a king in the real world, a judge of the dead in the underworld after his death. Then Ares turned to the other man at the table who hadn't yet spoken. Young, not as confident or arrogant looking as Talos. Even sitting down, Peake saw he had a slighter figure with wispy hair and buck teeth that made him look a little rabbit-like.
Hermes.
The young guy nodded and looked a little pleased with himself.
Hermes?
Talos piped up.
He's one of the main gods, isn't he? God of communication. Language, Ares said.
Ah, okay, so he's the brains.
Talos said. Tech guy. Bet you're a computer hacker or something.
Hermes shrugged.
And finally, Ares said, turning to Peake, you're Hades.
Peake's heart skipped a beat, and he realised everyone was staring.
The original badass, Hermes said,
almost in awe.
Him?
Talos said, looking and sounding bemused.
He's the fucking badass. King of the underworld. This is messed up. All right, big balls, Chief said as he got to his feet. Don't get your panties all twisted. There may or may not be reasons why we chose those names, but you don't need to know them. Remember my first rule. These are your only names now, for as long as you're here. Understood?
Yes, Chief, came the chorus of replies.
So how about you tell us why we're here now? Talos said. I suppose I probably should, Chief said, looking as though he was trying to hold back a smile. Quite simply, we're here to help stop another war. And as long as the people at the top of the chain still want that, we'll do anything to achieve that aim.
Chapter 6. Peake sat mostly in silence in his thoughts for several hours, waiting for the next chapter while the world turned around him. Sooner or later it'd send a signal out to let him know what to do next. A knock on the door. Was this it? He could think of only a small number of people that he expected to see through the peephole. None of them were particularly welcome visitors, even if he'd wanted the development. No, that wasn't true, actually. Katie. She'd be a welcome sight, even despite Harry's clear warning. Yelena? He saw neither of them, but a familiar face nonetheless. Two, in fact.
Peake! Open up! I know you're there!
Came the screechy shout and heavily accented English of the diminutive man who Peake knew only as Chan. His landlord. He had heard others refer to him as Jackie, but Peake thought the first name was only in reference to the famous movie star, who Chan bore little resemblance to. As for the lump of meat behind him, Chris, or more accurately, Christine, though Peake had heard to never call him that to his face.